My best friend asked me to be her surrogate, but she had no idea I was already pregnant with her husband's baby. Looking back now, I realize how messy my life had become without me even noticing it happening. The whole situation started about 8 months ago when my best friend since college came to me with tears in her eyes and hope in her voice. She had been trying to have a baby for 3 years, going through countless procedures and treatments that left her emotionally and physically drained. She sat on my couch that rainy Tuesday afternoon, fidgeting with her wedding ring while explaining how the doctors had given her one last option. Her body couldn't carry a pregnancy to term, but her eggs were still viable. She needed someone she trusted completely to carry her child, someone who would take care of the baby like it was their own. The irony of the situation hit me like a truck, but I couldn't tell her why. 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered I was pregnant with her husband's baby after a night that was supposed to be just comfort between friends. Her husband had been going through his own emotional struggles, watching his wife suffer through failed pregnancy attempts, and I had been dealing with my recent divorce. What started as innocent consolation over drinks had turned into something neither of us planned. He was vulnerable, I was lonely, and we both made a decision that would change everything. The guilt had been eating me alive ever since, but I convinced myself it was just a mistake that would never happen again. When she asked me to be her surrogate, my heart broke into a million pieces. Here was my dearest friend, asking me to help her have the family she desperately wanted, while I was secretly carrying what could have been that family already. The weight of the secret felt crushing, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy her world. I told her I needed time to think about it, which wasn't entirely a lie. I needed to figure out how to handle my own pregnancy first. The timing was impossibly complicated because I was only about 6 weeks along, and if I agreed to be her surrogate, the timelines would overlap in the most confusing way possible. For 2 weeks, I avoided her calls and made excuses about being busy with work. Meanwhile, I was dealing with morning sickness and the overwhelming anxiety of keeping this massive secret. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt like the worst friend in the world. The situation got even more complicated when her husband started texting me, asking if I was okay and if I had made a decision about the surrogacy. He had no idea about my pregnancy either, and I could tell he was just as torn up about everything as I was. His messages were careful and distant, but I could read between the lines. During this time, I started researching surrogacy laws and procedures, partly to understand what my friend was going through and partly to buy myself time. I learned about the legal contracts, medical requirements, and emotional support systems involved. It made me realize just how much trust she was placing in me. The breaking point came when she showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. She brought coffee and pastries, and her face was glowing with excitement. She had been looking at baby names and nursery designs, fully expecting me to say yes to carrying her child. Seeing her happiness made my stomach turn, not from morning sickness, but from the sheer weight of what I was hiding. She talked about how grateful she was to have me in her life, how she knew I would be the perfect person to help her become a mother. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my conscience. I finally told her I had decided I couldn't be her surrogate, making up some excuse about my own health concerns and not being ready for that kind of responsibility. The disappointment in her eyes was devastating, but I convinced myself it was better than the alternative of her finding out the truth. She left that day understanding but clearly hurt, and I spent the rest of the weekend crying and trying to figure out what to do next. I was about 8 weeks pregnant by then, and my body was starting to show subtle changes that I was desperately trying to hide. The following week brought an unexpected twist that changed everything. My friend called me in a panic, saying she had been rushed to the hospital with severe abdominal pain. When I arrived at the emergency room, she was being prepped for surgery to remove a large cyst that had been causing her fertility issues. Her husband was there, pacing the waiting room and looking completely lost. When he saw me, the relief on his face was obvious, but there was also something else there, a look that said he wanted to talk about what had happened between us. We sat in uncomfortable silence while waiting for news about the surgery. The doctor came out hours later with news that completely changed the game. The cyst removal had actually improved her fertility chances significantly, and she might be able to carry a pregnancy naturally after all. The joy on her face when she woke up and heard this news was something I will never forget. Over the next few weeks, as she recovered from surgery, I watched her transform back into the hopeful, excited woman she had been before years of fertility struggles. She started talking about trying again naturally, about how maybe this was the sign she had been waiting for. During this time, I was dealing with my own pregnancy progressing and the increasing difficulty of hiding it. I had started wearing looser clothes and avoiding situations where my changing body might be noticed. The stress of keeping this secret was taking its toll on my mental health. One evening, about 12 weeks into my pregnancy, her husband called me asking if we could meet for coffee. My heart raced because I knew this conversation was inevitable, but I wasn't prepared for it. We met at a small cafe across town where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. He looked exhausted and guilt-ridden when he sat down across from me. Before he could say anything, I told him about the pregnancy. The color drained from his face as he processed what I was saying. He asked if I was sure it was his, and I explained the timing made it impossible to be anyone else's. We sat there for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what this meant for everyone involved. He was torn between his love for his wife and the reality of what we had created together. I could see the conflict playing out across his face as he tried to process everything. The conversation ended with us agreeing that we needed to tell her the truth, but neither of us knew how to do it without destroying her completely. She was just starting to heal from years of fertility struggles, and this news would shatter her world all over again. 2 days later, before we had figured out how to tell her, she called me with incredible news. She was pregnant, naturally, for the first time in years. Her voice was shaking with joy as she told me about the positive test, about how the surgery had actually fixed everything. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted soap opera, where the timing of everything was impossibly cruel. Here she was, finally pregnant with the baby she had wanted for so long, while I was carrying her husband's child that was conceived during her darkest moments. The next few months were a blur of pretending to be happy for her, while dealing with my own pregnancy symptoms and the crushing weight of this secret. I started avoiding social gatherings and making excuses to not see her as much, claiming I was dealing with work stress. She was so wrapped up in her own pregnancy joy that she didn't notice how distant I had become. Her husband, on the other hand, was clearly struggling with the situation. I could see it in his eyes whenever our paths crossed, the guilt and confusion about what we should do. Around my 20th week, when I could no longer hide the pregnancy with loose clothing, I made the decision to tell her I was pregnant too. I crafted a story about a brief relationship that didn't work out, someone she had never met. She was initially surprised, but then excited about the possibility of our children growing up together. The lies were piling up so high that I felt like I was drowning in them. Every conversation became a minefield of avoiding topics that might reveal the truth. I started seeing a counselor to help me deal with the stress, but I couldn't tell them the real reason I was struggling. Her husband tried to be supportive in subtle ways, checking in on me through text messages and making sure I was taking care of myself. But every interaction felt loaded with the weight of our secret, and I could tell he was struggling just as much as I was. The situation reached a crisis point when she started planning a joint baby shower for both of us. She was so excited about the idea of celebrating our pregnancies together, completely unaware of the horrible irony of the situation. I tried to discourage the idea, but she was determined to make it happen. Planning the shower became an exercise in torture, as she talked about how wonderful it was that we were going through this journey together. She even joked about how our babies might end up looking similar, since we had been such close friends for so long. 3 weeks before the shower, something happened that I never saw coming. Her husband confessed everything to her during what was supposed to be a routine dinner conversation. He later told me he just couldn't take the guilt anymore, watching her plan celebrations while living with this massive lie. The phone call I received that night was unlike anything I had ever experienced. She was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying, but the words that came through were filled with pain and betrayal that cut me to my core. She accused me of being the worst kind of friend, of stealing her husband during the most vulnerable time of her life. She said she felt like everything about our friendship had been a lie, that I had been manipulating the situation from the beginning. I tried to explain that it wasn't planned, that we were both in pain and made a terrible mistake, but she wouldn't listen. She told me she never wanted to see me again, that I had destroyed not just her marriage, but her ability to trust anyone. The next few days were a nightmare of phone calls from mutual friends who had heard various versions of the story. Some sided with her, others tried to remain neutral, but everyone was shocked by the revelation. The small community we had built over the years was suddenly fractured. Her husband moved out of their house and into a temporary apartment, though he insisted he wanted to work on their marriage. He started calling me regularly, not romantically, but because I was the only person who understood what he was going through. The strangest part was that we were both still pregnant, both still dealing with the physical and emotional challenges of expecting a child, but now in completely different circumstances. I was facing single motherhood while she was trying to save her marriage. About a month after everything came out, she had a complication with her pregnancy that required bed rest. Despite everything that had happened between us, I found myself wanting to help her. I sent care packages through mutual friends and made sure she had everything she needed. Her husband told me later that my gesture had actually made things worse, that she saw it as me trying to ease my guilt rather than genuine care. He said she felt like I was trying to control the narrative and make myself look better. The legal complications started around my 32nd week, when lawyers got involved regarding parental rights and responsibilities. Her husband wanted to be part of the baby's life, but she threatened to leave him if he had any contact with me or the child. Navigating the legal system while heavily pregnant was exhausting and emotionally draining. I had to relive the story countless times with lawyers and mediators, each time feeling the shame and regret all over again. The most unexpected development came when she reached out to me directly for the first time in months. She was 36 weeks pregnant and had been thinking about the situation differently. She said she realized that our babies were innocent in all of this and shouldn't suffer because of our mistakes. We met at a neutral location, both of us huge and uncomfortable, to have the most difficult conversation of our lives. She was still angry and hurt, but she had also been thinking about the practical implications of our situation. She proposed a solution that I never could have imagined. She wanted to try to rebuild some kind of relationship, not as close friends like before, but as co-parents navigating an impossible situation. She said she couldn't forgive me yet, but she didn't want our children to pay the price. The arrangement we worked out was complicated and required a lot of boundaries. Her husband would be involved in our child's life, but interactions would be limited and supervised. She would try to separate her feelings about me from her feelings about the innocent baby I was carrying. I gave birth first, 2 weeks before her due date, to a healthy baby who looked remarkably like her husband. Holding my child for the first time was overwhelming in ways I hadn't expected, filled with joy but also sadness about the circumstances. She gave birth to her daughter 3 weeks later, and despite everything, I felt genuine happiness for her. She had finally gotten the family she had wanted for so long, even though the path had been nothing like what she had imagined. The first few months of parenthood were strange and complicated as we navigated our new reality. Our children were essentially half-siblings, born weeks apart, to mothers who had once been best friends but now could barely be in the same room. Her marriage survived, though it required months of counseling and a lot of work to rebuild trust. She told me later that becoming a mother had changed her perspective on a lot of things, including her ability to forgive, though she made it clear that our friendship would never be the same. My relationship with her husband evolved into something purely focused on co-parenting. We communicate about our child's needs and schedule, but we both learned to keep appropriate boundaries to respect his marriage and family. The most surprising outcome was how our children brought an unexpected healing to the situation. When they were about 6 months old, she agreed to let them have supervised playdates. Watching them together, seeing how naturally they connected, seemed to soften some of her anger. Over time, we developed a functional co-parenting arrangement that worked for everyone involved. It wasn't the friendship we used to have, and it wasn't the simple family structure any of us had imagined, but it was a way forward that put the children's needs first. Looking back now, with both children approaching their second birthdays, I can see how much we all grew and changed through this experience. The situation forced us to confront our mistakes, face difficult truths, and find ways to build something positive from the wreckage. The lesson I learned is that life rarely goes according to plan, and sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to unexpected gifts. My child is the light of my life, and despite the complicated circumstances of their conception, I wouldn't change anything about their existence. She and I will never be best friends again, but we've found a way to be respectful co-parents who put our children's well-being above our own hurt feelings. It took time, patience, and a lot of difficult conversations, but we created a functional family structure that works for everyone. The story isn't over yet, as our children grow and develop their own relationships with each other and with all of us. But I'm hopeful that we've built a foundation that will allow them to thrive despite the unusual circumstances of their beginning. Sometimes the most complicated situations can lead to the most meaningful growth. And while I regret the pain I caused, I'm grateful for the lessons learned and the family we've managed to create from the chaos.